Hey guys, Kuroda here. How's it going? So, as some of you may or may not know, I have been in a huge Godzilla kick lately, and I want to briefly, before I start this video proper, explain exactly where I am at with the franchise. So, for those of you who don't know, I have never been super into the series up until recently, and how that came about was, well, it was a culmination of a few things. First of all, the release of Godzilla King of the Monsters, or rather the upcoming release of it. It was kind of a desire to see that movie because it just looked awesome, and not really knowing much about the series aside from watching maybe a handful of the films. And also, great credit goes to James Rolfe, also known as the Angry Video Game Nerd, his channel, Cinemassacre. I watched his beginner's guide to Godzilla. If you guys haven't seen that, you really should, if you're not really familiar with the franchise or anything like that. And also a few of his other videos, as well as like another video I watched on YouTube, which is kind of a history of Godzilla. And basically, after watching those and wanting to see the new Godzilla King of the Monsters, the Legendary Picture one, I decided that I was going to make the start the crusade of watching all of the Godzilla films, of which there's about 30. So it's quite a crusade. So what I decided to do was I would start ranking all of the Godzilla films as I watched them. And for those who don't know, the Godzilla franchise is kind of divided into separate categories based on their release. So there's what is known as the Showa period Godzilla, which is the period of Godzilla that I'm going to be talking about today. But also there's then the Heisei period, which went through the 80s and early 90s. And then the Millennium period. And then there's the current period, of which there's both a Western and a Japanese kind of line of movies. The Legendary Pictures movies, which is Godzilla 2014 and Godzilla King of the Monsters. And there's also the Toho releases, which of which Shin Godzilla is the only live action one, but there's also some animated stuff. So today I want to talk about the original series of films, which is known to many as the Showa period of films, and that encompasses everything from the original film and that was released in 1954 to Terror of Mechagodzilla, which was released in 1974. So of those films, it's actually the largest span of movies of the entire franchise, and it encompasses 15 films. And yes, I have watched all 15 films. It was quite an undertaking, but I did finish them. And my overall thoughts on the series was I honestly, for the most part, was very entertained by these films. They span, really you could say that they span multiple genres in and of themselves, and there's huge progression and change from the first to the last of the Showa period. And what I wanted to do today, you guys, is to talk about these 15 films and rank them. So without further ado, this is my personal ranking of the first 15 Godzilla Showa period movies. So at number 15, we have All Monsters Attack, released in 1969. This film is probably, not even probably, without a doubt, in my opinion, the worst film of the entire series. If you want to go cheesy factor, I guess it's entertaining, but there's other films that are pretty cheesy in the entertaining way, and this film just completely misses the mark with me. I know there are, believe it or not, people who do really enjoy this film, but this is, as far as I'm concerned, bottom of the barrel in terms of the Godzilla franchise. It's basically a story about a kid who is being bullied by some people, and he ends up also being kidnapped by some robbers, and he basically daydreams about Godzilla and Monster Island, and basically wants to interact with the monsters. And as he's daydreaming, he meets Manila, who is notoriously one of the one of the worst monsters, or one of the worst kaiju in the entire franchise, and it's really dorky. You get scenes like this. And worst of all, this.
Godzilla says that I should learn to fight my own battles, you know.
And basically, as you can see, he interacts with Manila, who can talk, and Manila's voice is really awful, and it kind of uses a lot of stock footage from previous films like Destroy All Monsters and Ebra, Horror of the Deep, and a few others. And there's also a original monster for this as well called Ghidorah, who is just... he gets his ass kicked by Manila, and it's just not... it's a very weak film, I'll say that. At this point, the Godzilla films are really trying to appeal to kids, and instead of a more deep message that these films tend to have about, there's been films in this series about, the dangers of using nuclear weapons and atomic weapons and, environmentalism and things like that. This is just kind of bottom of the barrel, really trying to just appeal to kids, and the film doesn't work at all. Like I said, it's notorious as being one of, if not the worst films in the franchise. And the fact that they use so much stock footage really shows how lazy they got with this one. And the character is really unlikable and is really awkward in some ways. And the main character, the kid, and I don't know, I just really didn't like this film. I found it very boring. I fell asleep watching it. And I just didn't like it. So as far as the worst film, and if you're a person who wants to watch this series, you can give this one a hard pass, and you're not really missing very much. Number 14 is Godzilla vs. Megalon, which was released in 1973. This one I didn't really like either. There's a lot of people who actually really love this film. I personally thought that the plot was kind of all over the place. And the kaiju that are introduced in this one are also pretty lame as well, I have to say. Basically, the plot of it is there's this race of people living underground who are affected by nuclear testing from the humans above ground, called basically they live in this land called Seatopia, and they want to exact their revenge on humans by releasing this kaiju called Megalon. Megalon, he's rather mediocre in my opinion in terms of the kaiju that are introduced in this series, and I don't know, I'm not really a big fan of Megalon. He looks a little weird, and I know a lot of people do like Megalon, but to me personally, he's more on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of the kaiju. And they unleash Megalon on the world, and there's basically these scientists who invent this machine called Jet Jaguar. He's like a robot superhero sort of character. I think Jet Jaguar is so lame. A lot of people really like Jet Jaguar, a lot of fans. I think it just doesn't fit very well with Godzilla, in my opinion. And basically, Jet Jaguar goes and he recruits Godzilla to fight Megalon, and Megalon and Godzilla start fighting. And then, at one point, Megalon's not doing so well, so the agents of Seatopia basically they call out for help for some aliens from outer space who bring in Gigan from the last movie. And so you have Gigan and Megalon fight Godzilla, and then Jet Jaguar who joins them. And this movie, I will say, the cheesiness factor is kind of hilarious. And there's this infamous scene that is perhaps one of the most infamous scenes in the entire franchise, and you'll see here. Oh man, I love that scene. Godzilla just flying across on his tail. This scene is just ridiculous, and this movie is just beyond ridiculous. It's entertainment for the cheesiness factor, so if you guys want to see a film that's really cheesy, it works, but for me, I it just really missed the mark. I mean, there were some really funny moments in it for sure. I just really didn't like Jet Jaguar at all, and Megalon was just, subpar at best. So there's some funny moments in it, but overall, I really think this is one that you can skip as well. I'm not really a fan of Godzilla vs. Megalon. Number 13 is Son of Godzilla, released in 1967. This movie was actually better than I thought it would be, but it's overall not very good. This plot is basically introduces Manila, or Godzilla's son, and basically what's going on is there's scientists that are trying to make this weather machine on this island, and basically, long story short, due to a mistake, a balloon burst causing a radioactive storm, which causes these insects to grow huge, and you have these insects called the Kamacuras, I believe they're called, which are giant praying mantises, and they unearth this egg which contains baby Godzilla, or Manila, and he hatches and they start attacking him. He's crying, and then Godzilla shows up and basically wastes them and destroys them. And basically the rest of the film is Godzilla kind of showing baby Godzilla, or Manila, the ropes of how to use atomic breath and roar and all these other things. And it's alright. The human plot actually isn't so bad. I actually kind of enjoyed that. But Manila is one of the worst kaiju in the entire, as I mentioned with All Monsters Attack, one of the worst kaiju ever introduced, in my opinion. And aside from some cheesy moments in it, I really don't like the film. I do kind of like Kumanga, the giant spider that's introduced. There's a pretty cool fight scene with Godzilla and Kumanga that I enjoy. But overall, this film really misses the mark. I don't really enjoy it too much. The plot's, like I said, better than I expected, but the kaiju are kind of lame for the most part, except for maybe Kumanga. And, I guess it's interesting to see the relationship between Godzilla and his son, but I don't know. Manila's so unlikable that it just really kind of takes away from this film, in my opinion. So this is another one I think you can really... you can stand to just miss if you're really only wanting to kind of dip your toes into this franchise. Number 12 is Godzilla vs. Hedera, which was released in 1971. Basically, the plot of this one is, due to humans polluting the environment, this microscopic alien basically continues to grow in strength as it feeds on the world's pollution. It ends up becoming this monster called Hedera, who is this giant garbage creature, really strange. It's kind of a dark film and also has like these weird psychedelic elements, which I think really reflect the time that this was released, early 70s. I mean, you're talking like, the heart of, like kind of the end of hippie era, and a lot of weird music came out around that time. A period of music that I really enjoy. I actually really would say that's the high spot from this in this movie, is the music is really, really good. And there's like this psychedelic band, which I really wish I could find the name of, but I couldn't really find any information on it online. But there's some really cool music in this that I really like. As far as the plot, it's subpar. I think the message is well intended, where obviously it's got an environmentalist message, and they're trying to they highlight the dangers of man polluting the earth and all that stuff. But I think it just misses the mark, and it doesn't really do that message justice. I also think it's just a lot of like the deeper messages in Godzilla movies. There's many that are pulled off well, particularly in the first film. But in this one, there's just something about it where I just don't think it works very well. The film ends, the climax is Godzilla ends up fighting this garbage monster, Hedera, who ends up evolving into an even more dangerous creature, and it can fly and all this stuff. And there's a ridiculous scene where Godzilla basically goes to attack Hedera and uses his atomic breath to fly, as you can see here. This scene is so ridiculous. Again, one of the most ridiculous scenes in the entire franchise, and very iconic for that reason, I guess. Very notorious, I should say. Uh, the the movie isn't like awful, but it's just, to me, it just doesn't work. Again, this one I found kind of bland in a lot of ways, and I just didn't think worked. I really didn't like the Hedera creature. I appreciated where they were going with this film, but it's not bad. I think it's worth maybe one viewing. I kind of like some of the psychedelic-y elements in it, and I do like the music in it a lot. But yeah, it's just kind of a ridiculous film, and I don't think works very well. Number 11 is Ibrahim, Horror of the Deep, released in 1966. Well, the plot is actually decent in this film. I think that Ibrahim, the giant lobster, is perhaps one of the worst and most uninteresting kaiju of the entire series. It's just a giant lobster, man. I just really don't like Ibrahim very much, and I think a lot of people don't. The film's pretty decent, actually. It's as far as the plot goes, it's about basically these three people, one of which is a bank robber, basically stealing this boat, and they end up on this island after attacked by Ibrahim, and uncover this plot, this terrorist organization trying to take over the world. And they basically are manufacturing this weird yellow liquid that they're able to control Ibrahim with. They have also kidnapped these natives that are part of the tribe of natives that worship Mothra. And basically, long story short, these three guys end up becoming heroes, and they find Godzilla in this mountain and awaken him using a lightning rod. Godzilla basically awakens and destroys this factory that these terrorists are manufacturing this stuff with, and he ends up fighting Ibrahim in one of the most really anticlimactic kaiju fights, in my opinion. He pretty much just like tears Ibrahim's claws off. It looks like he's just having a lobster dinner. And one of the coolest things is actually Mothra shows up at the end and ends up saving the human characters, and it's not a bad film. It's just, I think if it was a different kaiju, it would be a little bit better. The plot is decent. I think it's worth one viewing, much like Hedera, but it's not one that you could really watch over and over again. It's cool seeing Mothra in it, like I said, and Godzilla's pretty badass in it, especially when he like lays waste to the factory, or the terrorist factory. But this movie was okay. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't that great either. It was a rather bland Godzilla movie, I would say. So if you want to see, I think it's worth at least one viewing, but overall it's certainly not the best Godzilla film. Number 10 is Godzilla vs. Gigan, released in 1972. The plot is a bit bland, but the kaiju and monster fights are really cool, actually. Gigan is I really like the monster Gigan, the kaiju. He's probably one of the most interesting new kaiju released during this period. Because, in my opinion, if you look at the entire Showa period as a whole, the first several films really are strong and kind of peak by, like, Destroy All Monsters is really the last really great film before it dips in quality a lot. But Godzilla vs. Gigan, as far as like this back half of the Showa period, I think is actually one of the stronger films. And while I don't love the movie, I really do like Gigan a lot. And there's a pretty awesome scene at the end of the film where basically Godzilla and Anguirus have to fight Gigan and King Ghidorah, and that whole fight scene is pretty badass in my opinion. I would, as far as the plot goes, the plot is kind of the weak point of this film. You basically have these aliens who are trying to basically inhabit the Earth after theirs is destroyed, and they're basically using Gigan and King Ghidorah to destroy the Earth, and they operate off of this base of operations in this amusement park, which has like a giant Godzilla, which is their base of operations. And I don't know, they use this weird like kind of radio signal thing, and it is used to kind of lure the like Godzilla to them, and the plot is just kind of weak in my opinion. And also this is one of the only films aside from All Monsters Attack where the kaiju actually are talking, and basically you have these scenes where Godzilla and Anguirus are talking to each other, and it's really dorky. It just doesn't work.
Something funny going on. You better check. Oh, yeah.
The Japanese version actually has them in like bubble like letters, kind of like a comic book style, which I actually think is a little bit better than the horrible English dub version of it. But I really didn't like that at all. But what really I think makes this what saves this film is Gigan being an awesome kaiju, and the fighting at the end is just great. I love it, and it happens to have some of my favorite monsters fighting in this, and that's of course being Godzilla, King Ghidorah, and my personal favorite Anguirus, which he's probably my favorite kaiju aside from maybe Godzilla. And yeah, I just really like the fight scene at the end. So this one is worth it just to watch the monster fight. If you're looking for a strong plot, this has one of the weakest plots in my opinion. So you know, this is a take it or leave it one, kind of like Ibrahim and Hedera, but I think this is a bit stronger than those films. Number 9 is Godzilla vs. King Kong, released in 1962. This one, I originally thought would have been much higher before I watched the film, but to be quite honest, I didn't really enjoy this one very much. I thought when you have two iconic monsters like King Kong and Godzilla, probably the two most iconic monsters in cinema, that this would be a better film, and it didn't really work for me. I don't know what it was. It is rather hilarious in some parts, particularly this scene with Kong. I just find it so ridiculous. The Kong suit looks really bad, in my opinion. I just don't like the look of Kong. He looks ridiculous. And in this one, Godzilla is a villain still, actually. For those who don't know, after the first several movies, Godzilla kind of makes a transition from being the main antagonist to the main protagonist in these films. And in this one, he's still kind of the bad guy, although I wouldn't necessarily call King Kong the good guy, although the humans are rooting for them. Basically, long story short, Godzilla becomes unfrozen from this iceberg, which I think is supposed to be the same place he was frozen in Godzilla Raids Again, which was the film before this. And he starts terrorizing Japan. King Kong, in the meantime, is on this island, and it's basically so he can be on TV. This TV producer wants him so he can attract more views for his TV channel. It's really weird, and I don't know. The plot's all right in my opinion. The fight between, like, both of the fights between King Kong and Godzilla are pretty hilarious, more so than actually badass in my opinion. And basically, they originally wanted, I guess, Godzilla to fight Frankenstein, so since that didn't work out, it ended up King Kong is able to use lightning to his advantage, and it powers him up. So basically, lightning helps Kong become stronger and helps him fight Godzilla in a more even fight, because Godzilla is just owning him with his atomic breath. It's a ridiculous film. It's certainly worth watching, I would say. But this one, again, didn't really quite hit it with me. It was entertaining enough. I'll probably watch it again. Maybe after a couple more viewings, I'll like it a bit more. But for two like iconic monsters like King Kong and Godzilla, it didn't quite hit the mark for me. The cheesiness factor was hilarious and made it entertaining in that sense, but overall I thought this one was a bit of a miss, but it wasn't bad either. It wasn't a terrible movie, but I don't know. Watch it for the cheesiness factor, not if you're looking for a really strong plot. That's for sure. So yeah, like I said, hit or miss for me. Okay, number 8. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, released in 1974. Mechagodzilla, of course, is one of the most iconic kaiju in the entire franchise, and this was his introduction. Basically, the plot of this one is a bit, maybe a little bit convoluted, I don't know, but I actually really enjoyed this film a lot. This is probably one of, if not the strongest films on the back half of the Showa period for me, and the story is basically, without getting super into the details of it, Godzilla starts rampaging and destroying destroying places in Japan, and Anguirus comes out and fights Godzilla. Now this is odd because at this point Godzilla has been a hero for many films now. So basically Godzilla destroys Anguirus, like almost kills him, but not before Anguirus like chips off a piece of Godzilla's skin, revealing metal. Ends up being it's Mechagodzilla, and Godzilla ends up fighting Mechagodzilla, and you find out that Mechagodzilla is being controlled from some base by these aliens who want to take over the planet. And basically, long story short, Godzilla and Mechagodzilla fight each other, and what happens is both are injured. Mechagodzilla is brought back by the aliens to be repaired, and Godzilla retreats back to Monster Island. In the meantime, the humans hear about this prophecy of this other monster called King Caesar, which they awaken, and ends up King Caesar and Godzilla fight Mechagodzilla. Due to, again, lightning for some reason being struck on Godzilla, he powers up and is able to use like a magnetic pole to fight Mechagodzilla, trap him, and he destroys Mechagodzilla, basically. It's a cool film. The plot is not bad. It's definitely not the worst plot. It's kind of middle of the road, in my opinion. But this is some of the best monster fights in the entire series, in my opinion. Mechagodzilla, I really feel like they amped up, especially after a lull of several movies, from like, I would honestly say like Son of Godzilla to maybe Godzilla vs. Megalon, which was released right before this. This is probably the strongest film of that, aside from maybe Destroy All Monsters, to me. And I don't know, it's a great. I really enjoyed it. I really loved the fights between Mechagodzilla and Godzilla. Some of the effects they use for Mechagodzilla for some of his weapons are really cool. And yeah, I don't know. Overall, I just really enjoyed this film. I think this one is definitely worth a shot, and I think this, in terms of my list, is when the Godzilla films really start getting pretty strong. Mechagodzilla also returns for the next movie, and then again in some of the other periods, like the Heisei period and the Millennium period, and has really become one of the more iconic kaiju, if you could really call him a kaiju, given he's mechanical, but one of the really iconic monsters in the entire franchise, and this was his introduction. So I had to put this definitely up a little bit more, but overall, I do think it suffers from not necessarily the most interesting plot, and really that's my main complaint with it, to be honest. I also really am not a big fan of King Caesar. I think he's kind of a lame kaiju. I don't know. He's kind of like, I kind of like the idea behind him, like being like this monster that needs to fulfill this prophecy, but they could have had a more interesting design, in my opinion. Number 7, Godzilla Raids Again, 1955. This was actually the second Godzilla film ever released. It's a direct sequel to the original Godzilla, and it's also one of only 2 films that are in black and white completely. This film also introduced my personal favorite kaiju, Anguirus, and this is also, again, one of the original films where Godzilla is still an antagonist. Basically, Anguirus is terrorizing Tokyo, and Godzilla Godzilla is basically awakened to fight Anguirus and defeats Anguirus, but then Godzilla becomes a problem himself, and the humans have to try to defeat Godzilla, which they freeze him in ice. I like this movie a lot. I thought it was really good at the time. I think was a little disappointed because I had watched it after the very first Godzilla film, and I think as a sequel to the first Godzilla film, it is a little disappointing. But if you look at the Showa period as a whole, it's certainly a stronger film than a lot of the other films on this list. And I think this is one I'll probably end up revisiting pretty soon because I think having watched those other films, I think I'll appreciate this one more. And the fighting was pretty good. The effects aren't nearly, I don't think, as good as the original Godzilla. And perhaps maybe it's not fair to solely compare it to that film, but it's hard not to because it is a direct sequel, and there was really no Godzilla films released for almost 10 years between this film and Godzilla vs. King Kong. During that interim, there was a slew of other movies released by Toho, Mothra, Rodan, a few others, and they had taken a break really from Godzilla films. So I think this film holds up well. Like I said, it did introduce my favorite kaiju, which is Anguirus, and it's good. It's a really good one. It's one that I personally would want to revisit again. And I don't think it should be totally judged based as a direct sequel to the original, because the original is really one of the best ones. So, but Godzilla Raids again is definitely worth a watch in my opinion. Number 6 is Destroy All Monsters, released in 1968. This movie's just fun. I love this movie. Again, this is one where the plot isn't the greatest, but this movie you don't watch for the plot. This movie you watch for all of the monsters. Basically, the plot is pretty simple. There's this kind of female alien race that wants to take over the world. That seems to be kind of a theme in a lot of these movies. And they basically take possession of the monsters on Monsterland, which is this island, essentially. I don't know why they don't call it Monster Island, but it's called Monsterland. And basically, the monsters, it takes place in the future, and all the monsters are on there. So you have Godzilla, Rodan, the Mothra larva, Anguirus, Manila, Baragon, Gorosaurus, Manda, and Kamanga. And they're all on this island, and this female alien race ends up kind of taking control of the monsters, and they all start attacking different cities all over the world. Kind of cool. I like that part of it. But really, the best part of the entire movie is the very end. The humans basically are able to take control back from the female alien race, and the monsters kind of, are able to do their own thing again, or in control of themselves. But the aliens end up summoning King Ghidorah from space, and there's this awesome epic scene at the end with all the monsters fighting King Ghidorah, and it's fantastic. So again, this movie, the plot isn't bad, it's not terrible, but the kaiju fights in this are fantastic. This is one you have to watch. It's really good. I watched this one with my wife actually, and it was very entertaining. We actually went and watched this movie right before we went to go see Godzilla King of the Monsters, the new Legendary Pictures one. So that was a good day. Lots of monster fights on that day. It was really good. This is a really good movie, and of this whole list, this is part of the group of films that are really good in my opinion. This is one of those iconic Godzilla monster movies. So, and I really like, aside from maybe Manila, I really like all these kaiju here. I really like Manda and Gorosaurus a lot. Manda's from his own film. Gorosaurus is from a film, I think it's like King Kong versus Mecha Kong. Gorosaurus is in there. I haven't seen that film. It's one I want to watch. But yeah, and of course Rodan is in this film as well, and Anguirus and all of them. This was kind of marked the return of Anguirus as well. It's a great film. Go see it. It's fantastic. Number 5, I actually put Terror of Mechagodzilla in here. I put this one in here because I actually liked this one a lot more than I thought I would. This is the final Toho Showa film. for this period for 10 years, and it's also pretty much a direct sequel to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and I really like this one. It also introduced the kaiju Titanosaurus, who I also like. I know a lot of people aren't necessarily the biggest fan of Titanosaurus, but I really like Titanosaurus. The plot is pretty interesting. It's about this scientist who wants to take revenge on humans on basically people because they kind of laugh him off for discovering this Titanosaurus creature, and he ends up being able to control Titanosaurus through his daughter, actually, who is killed, and then ends up being able to... He's killed, but the aliens from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla are able to save her, but give her possession of Titanosaurus. And it ends up where this doctor also helps them, the scientist also helps them construct, basically finish construction on Mechagodzilla again. They basically are able to take the parts from him and kind of reconstruct Mechagodzilla. And the monster fight's pretty awesome. It's actually Godzilla by himself fighting both Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla. And yeah, I really like this film. I thought this was a good send-off to the Showa period. It ends with Godzilla kind of walking back into the sea. And I don't know, I really like this one. I like I said, I really like Titanosaurus. Mechagodzilla was great. Again, as always, he's one of the best kaiju and one of the most iconic. And this film really worked for me. I don't know what it was. I even liked it more than Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. This one might not be for everyone, but as far as me, my personal favorites, I really like this film. So I think it's worth a shot. I think at the very least, these six... These top six really are the essential ones from this period, in my opinion. So you can really give or take the other ones, except for maybe Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is probably a requirement as well, but not so much as Terror of Mechagodzilla. I really enjoy this film, so you should check it out. It's a good one. Number 4, I'm tempted to put this one higher because I really enjoyed this, both for the cheesy factor a little bit, but also because I actually think it's got one of, if not the strongest plot of any of the Showa period films. This is Invasion of Astro Monster. This is basically, again, about about an alien race. This is actually the first film featuring like an alien race wanting to take over the world, and basically they ask to borrow Godzilla and Rodan to save their planet, Planet X, from King Ghidorah. And basically, they bring Godzilla and Rodan to their planet to fight Ghidorah, but there's a plot twist, which the aliens are actually wanting to take control of Ghidorah and Rodan, or Godzilla and Rodan, and they end up attacking the Earth with all three monsters. It's a really cool film. There's a lot of really neat sci-fi effects in it, and I love... If you guys haven't seen my video of top 10 best classic sci-fi films... I am a huge sci-fi fan, especially from this period, like the 50s and 60s. So this one hits all the right spots with me. I really loved this film. There's some cool fights. It's neat. Rodan and Godzilla and Ghidorah fight. It's really the only at least as far as I know, Showa period Godzilla film where the monsters actually fight on a different planet. And this film works for me. I love this film. I really enjoyed it. The aliens are cool. The effects are cool. The monster fights are really neat. And yeah, I highly recommend this film. I'm really tempted to put it a lot higher, but there's some other films of this period that I just had to put above it. But this is one of the strongest Godzilla films, in my opinion. So you got to see Invasion of Astro Monster. It's really great. And of course, it features Rodan and Ghidorah and Godzilla, who especially Rodan, I don't think is in enough of these early films. But I really enjoyed this one a lot. It's very good. Number 3 is King Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, 1964, released in 1964. This was a very, very important film and a turning point in Godzilla for a couple reasons. First of all, it was the introduction of King Ghidorah, who, for those of you who don't know, is the main antagonist of Godzilla. He's, the Joker to Godzilla's Batman. He's the, whatever, a hero villain you wanna compare it to, King Ghidorah is the main antagonist of these films. And This was a really great film. The plot is really good. It's, basically, again, the King Ghidorah comes from outer space, and you actually have the three probably most iconic kaiju, aside from King Ghidorah. Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra fight Ghidorah. Mothra is still in larva form, actually, and Mothra basically has to try to convince Godzilla and Rodan to fight King Ghidorah. This marks a really, really important milestone in this series as well, aside from King Ghidorah's introduction, in that this is the first film in which Godzilla is actually a protagonist. So you actually have the iconic Godzilla versus King Ghidorah fight, and there's some cheesy moments for sure, like this. And yeah, it's not like a perfect film, but I really like this. The monster fights in this are some of the best in the whole Showa period, and I really, really enjoyed this film. This is, as far as I'm concerned, kind of required viewing definitely this period, but also just to see the introduction of King Ghidorah. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. I just really like this film a lot. This is a must watch. Number 2 is Godzilla vs. Mothra, 1964. This is a film that I really, really loved upon viewing. This film actually surprised me with how much I liked this film. I really, really love Mothra, and this is basically gives sort of an origin story to Mothra. And basically, humans discover this giant egg, which obviously hatches into Mothra. And these guys are trying to monopolize it and capitalize on it and basically charge people to see it. And there's these two fairies, which are like these, they're basically sort of like in a way, the protectors. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but they're basically inform the humans about this egg and how it needs to be returned to Mothra. And long story short, Mothra shows up, and after Godzilla emerges and starts attacking Japan, and he's going after the egg as well. And he's still an antagonist at this point, too. And there's a big fight between Godzilla and Mothra. And Godzilla actually defeats Mothra, but not before the egg hatches and two Mothra larvae come out. And then at the end, basically, these two larvae fight Godzilla again. And I don't know, this was a really good film. The plot's really strong. I didn't want to say too much of the plot because I don't want to spoil too much of it, because I think it's really worth a shot. In my opinion, it's the second best of the Showa period, and it's definitely worth a viewing. And there's this sort of mystique and like weird mysticism about Mothra that I really like. And and you see like this island where these people basically worship Mothra, and I don't know, there's something about it. I really just loved this film, and there's some really good messages in it as well, which I think is also really important. I highly suggest this film. Go watch Godzilla vs. Mothra. It's a great movie. And now, of course, number 1, we get to the greatest film of the Showa period. I mean, if you hadn't guessed it already, it's a kind of a no-brainer. The original Godzilla 1954 film. This movie is classic. This was a movie that I instantly liked as soon as I watched it. Of course, this was the introduction to Godzilla. In many ways, it's probably the darkest film. It's in all black and white. There's actually 2 versions of this film. There's an American version starring Raymond Burr, which basically kind of cuts out a lot of the really important messages and scenes in the original Godzilla. And I don't really recommend that. I recommend watching the subtitled Japanese version, which really shows the true theme of the entire franchise, really. And it's Godzilla being a metaphor for the atomic bomb. And Godzilla basically emerges from the sea and destroys Tokyo. And basically the origin of Godzilla is that due to like nuclear radiation, mutating whatever it is that Godzilla is supposed to be, a kind of dinosaur sort of thing. It causes Godzilla to emerge and wreak havoc on Tokyo, and nothing can destroy it, and there's some kind of dark imagery showing a lot of death and destruction, and this is post-World War II, and you gotta understand, World War II ended barely 10 years before this film was made, so it's really a deep film about the dangers of atomic weapons, and there's also another kind of subplot of the movie where you have the scientists developing this ultimate weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer, which is ultimately used to defeat Godzilla, and he's very, very conflicted about whether or not he wants to unveil this weapon on the world because he's afraid of man using it in a bad way, and it's a really, really deep film. I really enjoyed it. I think the black and white makes it scarier in my opinion, and Godzilla, this was before Godzilla got a little goofy there in the middle of the Showa period, and he looked a lot scarier. I think this film in a lot of ways holds up more than any other film in the Showa period, and honestly in a lot of ways more than any other Godzilla film, and it is indeed the most important it's really the most important Godzilla film of all, and I think over anything really the message is important, in that like humans using weapons and to cataclysmic effects is dangerous, and should we be using these weapons, and do we really see the full effect of what we're doing when we unleash these weapons onto the world? And it's just a great film. I highly recommend it. If you don't like any of the films, I highly recommend at least watching that one movie because it has a great message, and it's really the place that you should start when you're going to dive into these films. It's the place I started. It was also part of the reason why I decided to watch all of these films, was because I originally watched it with my wife and we enjoyed it, and I decided to dip my toes into the films even more, and now I'm getting through the Heisei period now too, which that's for another video. But anyway guys, that's my list of the top 15, or rather the entire Showa period ranked. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. For you Godzilla veterans, I hope me as a noob did it justice. I have to say that I've really been enjoying my journey going through all of these films, and while not every film is a winner, I have enjoyed watching even the really crappy ones for the most part, and I look forward to reviewing the entire Heisei period when I'm finished with that. I'm about 2 movies in right now. So once I'm done with that, I'll have another video out specifically highlighting that period of the franchise. And yeah, I just want to thank everybody for watching, and watch out for Godzilla! Oh man. Thanks for watching guys. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Peace.